We're talking about exclusivity, and one of the problems people struggle with is the view of other religions. So let's talk about that. So people, when you witness to them, they will challenge us by saying things like this. Are you saying that a sincere Muslim or a Buddhist or a Hindu is going to hell? And they'll challenge us, say, isn't it arrogant on your part to say it's only Christians who are going to heaven? And so that's a challenge. When you believe in the exclusivity of Jesus, how does that affect people of other religious faiths? I should throw in one point, is that Buddhists don't believe in hell, and neither do Hindus. But anyways, that's just beside the point. A very popular view held in larger society is that about religious beliefs uses the image of a wagon wheel. And you have the wagon wheel, which has the circumference around it, and then you have, in the center, you have the hub, and then you have spokes coming in. And so they would see all the religions of the world on the circumference: Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Baha'i, and on and on and on. And then they all converge in the center. They're all going in the same direction, and the center, we're all heading in the same direction, and albeit by very different paths. And so they believe that all the different paths all culminate at one God. Now, the response that I give to that is I struggle with that, because what you're having here is competing truth claims. For example, I'll give you an illustration, that Christianity says that Jesus is God's Son who died on the cross and rose from the dead. But Islam denies that Jesus is God the Son, that he died on the cross and rose from the dead. So now what you have is two beliefs that are totally contradictory. One says Jesus is, and one says Jesus isn't. So now you have the fact that you can't have both being true. We call this the law of non-contradiction. Both competing claims can't be true. You can't say, let me give you a practical illustration. Somebody asks you, how do I get to Brandon? Well, if you say, well, go to number 1 highway and go west, and the other person says, no, go to number 1 highway and go east, are both true? Will you get to Brandon if you go east? Obviously not. You have to go west to get to Brandon. We live like that. For some reason, all of a sudden, people seem to dispense with the reality of everyday life, and which they accept the law of non-contradiction and live by it. And then when it comes to anything like this, then they seem to be able to accept very contradictory terms. They say your generation is very comfortable living with contradiction. Only, however, when it comes to philosophical and moral things, they only live that way. They don't live it that way in the rest of their lives. And so the fact of the matter is that when you say all religions are all heading to God, it makes you feel good. And it's like we're being very kind and gracious to everybody. But candidly, it doesn't work. And many of these religions are completely different from each other. They're polar opposites. And like I said, if you have two completely opposite things being claimed, both can't be true. Let me give you some illustrations. If you're in Winnipeg, you're not in Brandon. That's the law of non-contradiction. If you are white, you're not black. If you cheer for the Bombers, you don't cheer for the Riders. If you cheer for the Bombers, you'll be cheering for a Grey Cup winner. If you cheer for the Riders, you won't be cheering for a Grey Cup winner. So there's a perfect illustration, right? The fact of the matter is we live that way. And so for that reason, people then have to make the very difficult job of examining the truth claims of each, and then deciding for themselves which they will accept as true and which they will regard as false. That's the job of every person. You then look at all the competing truth claims, and you have to come to a decision which is true, which is not true. Now, we as Christians operate in the spirit of love and acceptance, and that should characterize our lives. So then we give people the freedom to choose as they believe. And we respect their God-given right to say no to God and Jesus and Christianity. Now, at the same time, while we respect them and give them that freedom, we inform them that if they choose to go the way away from Christianity, according to our understanding of truth, they will go to hell and die one day. Now, at the same time, we do not reject them. We keep on loving them. We keep on praying for them. We keep on witnessing to them. We keep trusting God to use us to bring them into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So that's how we operate. We give people the option. You can take that position. I tell people you're free to believe as that, but your choice has consequences. as I understand it. Now, you can reject even what I'm saying. And someday, I believe my witnessing to somebody else is the basis upon which God will then say at Judgment Day to that person, I sent Henry to you. He told you. Remember that? Remember that day you talked with him? He talked to you about Jesus. You were outside the front entrance of Miller College of the Bible, and your name is Rose. You see, every witnessing attempt is never a failure because it's the basis upon which God will someday ultimately judge people for having rejected Christ. I, by witnessing, give them the chance, but it's their choice, and we respect that choice. I don't put people down. I don't call them down if they reject. And so that's the response that I have to other religions. One final thing, or is this the final thing? I've got to check my notes. Sort of the final thing, is that when people react negatively against the claims of Christ to be the only way, I say to them, you know what? Your argument's not with me. It's actually with Jesus, who himself made that claim. He claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life. I didn't make that up. As a matter of fact, as a Christian, I just believe what he said. As a matter of fact, it was there when I came along, his claim. And I'm simply responding what Jesus said. If you don't like it, you're not rejecting me, you're rejecting what Jesus said. And so therefore, as a Christian, and if I'm going to be a good Christian, I'm going to have to accept what that statement of Jesus is, or else I shouldn't call myself a Christian. And I live by that. Acts 4:12, the apostle said, neither is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. NIV says, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven that has been given among men by which we must be saved. And so that's a very exclusive statement. I can choose to reject it, but then if I reject it, I should have the courage to call myself as a non-Christian, not as a Christian. I tell people, either you fully believe it or not at all. If you're sitting halfway on the fence, obviously you're not following the ultimate of the truth that it should lead us to. And then finally, here's how I respond when people struggle with Jesus being the only way. I say to them, it all depends on what Jesus said and who he said he was. That if he's not the eternal Son of God, who came to earth, having left heaven and came to earth and became a man, then he's not the only way to God. In fact, he's not the eternal Son of God. He's not even our way to God. He's either a deceiver or very deceived himself. People a lot of times say, I don't believe Jesus was God, but I believe he was a good teacher. He was a good man. And I say, Jesus wasn't who he said he was. He wasn't a very good man. He was a liar. He was a deceiver, or at worst, he was mentally deranged. C.S. Lewis makes this statement in Mere Christianity. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. And Lewis says, that's the one thing we must not say. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he's a poached egg, or he would be the devil of hell. The point of what he's saying, like people say Jesus was good man, he's a good teacher, and yet somebody who says, unless you believe in me, you're going to perish and go to hell, that's not a good man. If he's not who he said he was, he's a bad man. Goes on to say, he would either be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he's a poached egg, or else he'd be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. That it seems obvious to me that he was neither a lunatic or a fiend, and consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. Mere Christianity, pages 55 to 56. And so therefore, if Jesus is who he said he was, if he is the eternal Son of God, and then his claim to be the only way is true, and we have one of two responses. We can take the step of faith and choose to believe him and his claims, or we can take the step of non-faith, choose not to believe, reject him and his claims. And that's the choice that people have to make in their lives. You have to make that choice, and I know you have. Remember a number of years ago, I was driving along the highway and there was a hitchhiker. I always pick up hitchhikers because they're captive audience and I can witness to them. A few months ago, I had a guy between Stonewall and Teulon. Interesting. I should tell you that story. Picked him up and I started talking to him about the Lord. And I picked him up around just by the Balmoral turnoff as I was heading up to Teulon to the church there where I'm interim pastor. And I realized I had about 8 miles, and I thought, how can I, in 8 miles, present the plan of salvation to him? So I got right into it. I asked him if he went to church ever and the rest of that, and got into the plan of salvation, and I shared the gospel with him. And I had prayer with him as he got off. And then about a month later, I got a phone call from one of the guys in church who said, I picked up a hitchhiker yesterday. And he said, I started witnessing to him. This is a fellow I had led to the Lord myself years before. And he said, I started witnessing to him. And he said, there's another guy who said the same thing you did just about a month ago to me. He said he was the pastor of the church in Teulon. So the guy said, that's my pastor. It's Henry Ozerny. So witnessing to hitchhikers is fun. I wouldn't recommend it to you girls, taking a chance, especially if it's a male. And I wouldn't pick up a female, but I would pick up another guy. And anyways, I picked up this guy who was driving from Stonewall to the city on 236. And I picked him up and we started talking. So I presented the plan of salvation and I said, would you like to accept Christ as Savior? And he said, I don't know. And I said, let me ask you a question. How can you lose? If you believe what I say and I tell you, and later on you die and you find out I was wrong. I said, what have you lost? I said, nothing. But what if you don't believe and you die and you find out I was right? What will you have lost then? And I said to him, what do you have to lose by believing now? That's what I think they call Pascals Wager that Danny was talking about recently. And I used it with him, and I said, what do you have to lose? What if I'm wrong? You haven't lost anything. What if I'm right? You've lost everything. And I left him with that. I trust the Holy Spirit used it in his life subsequently. All right, that's obstacle number 3. And we're going to move to obstacle number 4. But any questions at all before we get in the 4th obstacle?